fight fans, welcome back for episode 5 of Puncher's Chance. I'm Anthony Balester, always joined by the great Brett Cagle. We have a lot to break down. We had a lot happen last week, and we got a lot of stuff going into this week. You know, we had the Jake Paul fight. We got UFC 304. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, Brett. You know, but before we get into it, you know, definitely make sure you're following Puncher's Chance. Follow our podcast on all social medias at Punch ETB. Make sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. Also, make sure to follow the YouTube channel at youtube.com/ETB Network for all of our shows and all of our other sports and ETB Network shows. If you can't watch us, then take us on the road and listen to us wherever you can on our podcast networks.
Puncher's Chance is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers for Q&A. Playback makes watching fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching the commentators and communities you care about, win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB network to find out more, including our live stream schedule.
So, of course, we're going to have to start with what was the biggest news from last week. You know, we had the Jake Paul versus Mike Perry fight. Went exactly how I thought, Brett. I thought it was going to be a late-round knockout. I thought Mike Perry would be able to tough it out in the first couple rounds, and then eventually Jake Paul would, you know, put his size on him and be able to get the finish as the fight goes on. But, you know, after watching the fight, Brett, and after having a few days to think about it, what was your overall reaction from this fight?
Well, I don't – a lot of people gave Mike Perry a hard time in this one, but I don't know how it could have gone any way but how it went. You know, he took the fight on short notice. He's fighting a guy who's 30 pounds heavier than he is. You know, Mike Perry naturally was fighting at 170 pounds in the UFC before he was released, was fighting at a similar weight in BKFC. Now, his success in bare knuckle was due a lot to his toughness, his ability to take a bare knuckle shot from other people and walk through it, and them not being able to take his punches. But, you know, that's not the case when we're using gloves here. It's really a tactical battle, and he was outclassed on Saturday night. 3 knockdowns, including 1 in the first 60 seconds. You know, Mike Perry did try and tough it out. He did take some big shots and keep going. And, you know, even tried when he was wobbling after that 3rd knockdown. But, you know, I thought it was just too soon for him, too much. And he's a guy who has, you know, was making his professional debut in boxing. Jake Paul has been fighting numerous guys who are over the hill, who are making their debuts, whether it be Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley, Nate Diaz, or this last weekend with Mike Perry. You know, these guys are not as experienced as him in the sport he's competing in, and they're not, you know, his age. They're not in his prime. I'm not really liking the selection of opponents. When he first started his career, you could see an upwards trajectory where opponents were getting harder, and he kept climbing the ladder to eventually that fight with Tommy Fury. And, you know, since then, I feel like the level of opponent has declined. And we're sitting here, you know, picking on matchups against 60-year-olds and Mike Tyson, 58 to be exact, or guys in bare knuckle like Mike Perry, who are never really tacticians. So, you know, I would like to see him try and fight Tommy Fury again. I think he needs to get that rematch back for that loss, the first loss on his record, and then he can continue to progress up the boxing ranks against better boxers. But right now, I think that the call-outs that he made on Saturday night were a little bit, you know, I didn't like him, but I want to see him fight Tommy Fury again and try and get back that loss.
Yeah, Brett, I think you said it perfectly. I think Tommy Fury is the best matchup for him. I think Jake Paul has actually improved since his last matchup with Tommy Fury. So I think it would be a much closer matchup. A lot of people thought the first matchup was close. I don't think Jake Paul won the fight, but there's a selective people out there who do think he did win the fight. Jake Paul did call it Alex Pereira. Now, we know the UFC is not going to let that happen. But even if it did, I don't think Jake Paul wants that fight. You know, I think Alex Pereira actually probably would get the best of Jake Paul. You know, he's a former kickboxer. Now, you know, Alex Pereira, his best thing is using those leg kicks. And, you know, using those leg kicks is how, you know, kind of gets guys with those shots. He forces guys to, you know, leave their face open. So without being able to do those leg kicks, maybe Jake Paul could get a couple good shots on him. But I thought that was a crazy call out. I think it was just marketing. I think Jake Paul was just going for what's the biggest name. And right now, what is the biggest name in the UFC? It is Alex Pereira. But I did see some stuff out there that Conor McGregor was upset. He was tweeting at Mike Perry saying that he's fired, which Mike Perry laughed it off and said, "How can you fire me? I own half the company." So Mike Perry's not going anywhere, and he's definitely going to go back and dominate the bare knuckle boxing world. But what were your thoughts, Brett? And what do you think about Conor McGregor being so upset at Mike Perry?
Well, we saw Mike kind of, promote a league that it seems that he's trying to create called Dirty Boxing. He was wearing hats that said Dirty Boxing and T-shirts and trying to promote something that it looks to be his next phase. Now, if he does leave bare knuckle and go to this Dirty Boxing league that he's trying to create, then obviously we won't see him again in the BKFC or with David Feldman. They're going to have to create a new star over there. But if he does come back, honestly, I think Conor McGregor's one loss away from fighting Mike Perry in the BKFC. So, quite honestly, and it'd make him money if he did that. Obviously, both of them own half the company, so they're getting a lot of those pay-per-view revenue with Feldman. So they'd be in on a piece of the pie that they've never been in before. So I think that that's something that Conor could do if he lost. But as far as Mike Perry's concerned, I felt bad for him, but I think that he cashed in with the biggest payday of his career. He did the best that he could, and he doesn't have anything to duck his head about. Tyron Woodley was a champion in the world in the same weight class he competed in the UFC. He fought Jake Paul and ended up being unconscious. So there were ways that Mike Perry, this could have gone worse for him. So it's not really anything he needs to hang his head about. He showed his toughness in there, and I'm going to watch him again if he does go back to BKFC.
Yeah, you mentioned potential Mike Perry and Conor McGregor bare knuckle boxing fight. I mean, honestly, out of all these fights we could potentially talk about, Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor. I mean, if we could watch Conor McGregor in a bare knuckle boxing match against Mike Perry, I would actually, pay money for that. I spent $100 of my own money to watch every minute of that. That would be absolutely insane. Yeah,
I think so too. It'd be must watch. They'd sell out arena. They'd both make a lot of money because they're inside on that pay-per-view revenue. So, I really think that could happen if Conor washes out of the UFC. So that's something to look at. But I thought it was interesting his comments on Jake Paul. And honestly, other than the insults and profanity that he put in that long tweet, I agreed with a lot of what he was saying. This guy is not tested by the Nevada Athletic Commission. He goes to different states to where the drug testing may be lax. He looks like a guy who's on steroids, quite honestly. But at the same time, he is dedicated to the sport and doing his best, which I appreciate. I think Jake Paul is determined like this. I've been thinking about it a lot since Saturday. He's not good enough to contend at the pro level against guys who have been doing it since they were 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. But he's better than every amateur that starts at the age of 20 or up. So if he's got experience on these guys in his discipline in boxing, even if they're MMA guys, he's going to win. He has been in the gym longer. He's going on 5 years now of seriously training boxing. He's in there probably 5 to 10 hours a day when these guys are grappling at some points and doing nothing related to the sport of boxing or, getting their skills up. So I think that he's really handpicking opponents here. I'd like to see him fight a guy who's, been boxing since they were a little kid and has been around the sport. And I think Tommy Fury checks a lot of those boxes.
Yeah, honestly, I've heard a lot of experts give their opinion on, Jake Paul, and, a lot of them vary. And honestly, Brett, I think the way you just put it may be the best example of what Jake Paul actually is. Like you said, you said it perfectly. He could beat, the guys who have got a little bit of training, know a little bit of what they're doing, but he's not going to beat any of the guys who got that muscle memory, who've been doing it since they've been little kids. I think that's a perfect way to, put where Jake Paul is. Honestly, there has been a lot of YouTubers that have tried, and there's been plenty of YouTubers who have probably spent just as much time as Jake Paul. But for some reason, I do think Jake Paul does have a natural ability and natural power. I think he does come from an athletic family. Him and his brother, Logan Paul, are natural athletes that were great wrestlers growing up. And I think that does benefit Jake Paul. But like you said, when he does fight a guy like Tommy Fury, he is going to continue to struggle. He does continue to improve with each and every fight. So it will be interesting to see if maybe, if in a couple years, since he did start late in his career, he does have not as much head damage or as wear and tear on his body. He may be a guy that hits his prime in his early 30s. And, it's going to be interesting to see where Jake Paul is at like 30, 31 years old when he does hit his prime, if he can start beating these guys who were training for their whole lives.
Yeah. Well, if he does that, in my opinion, he's going to have to pick a weight class. And that's going to be, a big part of it, because if you go off the weight class that they fought at last weekend, he'd be fighting guys like Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua. So we're sitting here fighting 170-pound guys at heavyweight. That doesn't really work, especially when we're trying to move up world rankings. But if he were to drop down to 195 pounds, 180 pounds, go for a cruiserweight or a super middleweight title, then certainly he'd have to get his body in shape and make a full commitment to that. But where he's at right now, he's very far from title contention, in any sanctioning body, in my opinion, against a ranked fighter.
Yeah, he's definitely going to be way too small to compete with any of the really serious heavyweights. Cruiserweight, like you said, may be the best, weight class for him. Have him come in at about 195, 200. I think that would be an easy weight cut for him. I think if you really, really want to take it serious and have a serious advantage, maybe if he could fight at 170 or 168. I know he constantly keeps calling, Canelo. But maybe if he could kindly cut down, I think that would be a tough weight cut for him. But I think that would give him the best advantage. But like you said, he's definitely going to have to pick a weight class. And I definitely think it's going to have to be somewhere between 170 and probably 195. Anything above that, he's going to struggle with the heavyweights.
Yeah, and honestly, with the amount of weight that he's put on his body at this point, I think that asking him to go down to 170 may be a lot. He was a guy who we saw fight Ben Askren and these guys even early in his career at like 180, 181, 184, and then it would climb when he fought Silva. It was about 190. And he keeps going up in weight. I think it'd be a lot for him to go fight Canelo at Canelo's, championship competitive weight class. But, maybe down the line when Canelo retires, he just had a fight announced today against Edgar Berlanger. He's a talented up-and-coming guy who I was watching on Friday Night Fights. He was on Top Rank and in their promotion there with Friday Night Fights for a numerous amount of years and has built his star. But he's a young prospect coming up, and he's going to be next for Canelo. So we'll have to see. Jake Paul, I think he needs to fight Tommy Fury. Mike Perry, we'll see what he does in the BKFC. Maybe he goes and tries to fight a welterweight champion there or something like that and get a win back under his belt. But it'll be interesting. But we've got a lot to talk about today, man. UFC 304 too.
Yeah, let's get right into it. We got Leon Edwards going up against Belal Muhammad. Honestly, Brett, when I look at UFC 304, right now before the card even starts, on paper, I got it as at least the third best pay-per-view of the year so far. Obviously, 300 was definitely the best. I think 299 was very good as well. I think this has to be probably the third best pay-per-view, and if these fights deliver, this may be the second best pay-per-view of the year. There's a lot of great fights and a lot of good things to talk about. We have to start right at the top, like we said. Leon Edwards fighting Belal Muhammad for the welterweight championship of the world. Belal Muhammad definitely well-deserved. He's been on a tremendous win streak. He's been really, really pushing and really, really trying hard to get this title shot, and he finally got rewarded after all his hard work. It's definitely going to be a tremendous matchup. I do think Leon Edwards is probably the superior striker. When these guys fought the first time before the fight ended to an eye poke, I think Leon Edwards, when he was keeping it on the feet, was getting the best of Muhammad. I think he was piecing him up with fast strikes. And if he stays on the feet, it's going to be tough for Belal Muhammad. But in this one, I think Belal Muhammad is better than he was in that first matchup. He's been a part of the Khabib training facilities. He's a tremendous grappler, and I think he's going to make the adjustments. I think he's going to strike a little bit to keep it, fair and keep Leon Edwards guessing to ultimately lead the takedowns. And I think what he's going to do is he's going to fight this just like all the Dagestani UFC fighters like to do. He's going to strike a little bit and then ultimately lead Leon Edwards to the ground. And I think he's going to take Leon Edwards to the ground, and I think he's going to control him for most of the fight because I do think he's a better grappler than Leon Edwards. A lot of people are picking Leon Edwards. I feel like no one is picking Belal Muhammad. But honestly, Brett, I'm going to go with the upset here. I'm going to go on a limb, and I'm going to go with Belal Muhammad to upset Leon Edwards. I think he's going to win the fight by decision. I think Belal Muhammad is very, very underrated. He showed against Sean Brady how great he is. He showed against Gilbert Burns how great he is. And I'm at this point, Brett, I'm sick of him being, underrated. And I'm sick of him being, pushed to the side and people automatically thinking he's going to lose in every matchup. People don't seem to remember who Belal Muhammad is. But I do think after this fight, people will remember the name Belal Muhammad as the welterweight champion of the world.
Well, he certainly has the opportunity this weekend. Leon Edwards will enter this matchup as a minus 260 betting favorite at ESPN Bet. So if you're looking to handicap this fight, Bilal Muhammad is a plus 210 underdog. I liked what you said about Muhammad in this one. I think that he has a more well-rounded skill set. You're correct. On the feet, he may be able to land, but he's not going to want to hang out there at range with Leon Edwards. Even in that first fight, it looked like Leon was dictating the range. I know that he got eye poked there at a distance, and that's what ended the fight. That was one of the most gruesome eye pokes that we've seen. A very tough competitor in Bilal Muhammad, who's known for his resiliency and fortitude and toughness, was brought to tears by that, that eye poke. So it certainly affected him. I would have liked to seen a little bit more in that matchup so we could gauge this one this weekend. But, I think it's a well-rounded martial artist in Bilal Muhammad versus a very elite striker in Leon Edwards. If Bilal cannot get this fight to the ground, I think there's going to be significant problems for him on the feet, and he may even get finished. If he can get this fight to the ground and mix the takedowns with the punches, get cage control, and make this a really dirty fight in the clinch, I think that you're right, Anthony. I think he might be able to grind his way to a decision victory here. But I've got to go with Leon Edwards fighting at home in England. I'm going to go with Leon Edwards in a late round knockout. I'm going to give him a knockout in round 3. I think that he's probably going to figure Bilal out midway through the fight. Look for Bilal even to have success like you're talking about early with the takedowns. I just think taking down Leon Edwards over the course of 25 minutes is a lot to do round in and round out. And he showed good takedown defense against Colby Covington and some of these other guys he's fought ever since that Gunnar Nelson fight. He's really been able to stay on his feet and utilize his own skill set. So I'm going to take Leon Edwards in this one, 3rd round knockout or TKO. But I think that Bilal Muhammad is a credible opponent, and people are, doubting him. And I think that the plus 210 line may be a little bit too steep. I would not personally bet Leon Edwards on the money line this weekend. I would bet him knockout or points. That takes the minus 260 down to about minus 175, which to me would be a better number to bet on Leon Edwards. But I'm going to take Leon by knockout. You're taking Bilal by decision. I think it's going to be a great fight.
Yeah, I think so too, bro. I think this stuff we could go either way. Now, do you think, there's any merit to what people are saying when they question Leon Edwards' resume? A lot of people sit there and say, hey, Kamaru Usman was, mark my words for saying this, but kicking your ass the whole fight. Mm-hmm. And then you get lucky with a kick at the end and you win. And obviously, I think that pretty much shattered Usman's confidence. And I think that, we saw that in the second fight. And then I think he fought kind of a washed up outside of his prime Colby Covington, who did had a serious foot injury in the beginning of the fight. So do you think Leon Edwards maybe hasn't been tested, as much as people say he is? And, do you think maybe Bilal Muhammad will be the toughest test for him up to this point?
I think there's a point to be made there, certainly. He's fought guys that are former champions in the past, like Rafael Dos Anjos. But if you go and rattle off the names here, I'm looking at him. You're talking about Gunnar Nelson, a split decision, which I brought up. Gunnar Nelson is a great fighter, but he's not necessarily a world title challenger or on that level. A very good jiu-jitsu guy. If he can get you to the ground, you're in trouble. But, not one of these top elite level contenders. Then you had a past your prime Rafael Dos Anjos. Then we had the no contest with Bilal. The Nate Diaz fight he looked good in, but we saw Nate Diaz just lose to Jake Paul. So, I don't know how much stock to put into that victory either, especially since he was caught in the 5th round. Then we're talking about the Kamaru Usman contests, which, he had to dig deep in those contests. And when he knocked out Usman was the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. And Dana White was making comparisons to George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva, and everybody was getting a little bit in over their head, in my opinion. But Leon Edwards, proved he was the better fighter twice in that matchup against a historically great fighter. I think that has to be recognized a little bit. But the Colby Covington matchup, I agree with you 100%. Colby Covington did not look like his normal self. That did not look like the Colby Covington that fought Jorge Masvidal the year previously. The takedown attempts did not look, like they were on point, or like he had been in the gym and the repetitions were underneath him. It didn't look like he quite had his legs underneath him on some of those takedown attempts, and his footing in timing wasn't necessarily there. I think Edwards is, as far as skill level and competition, he could have fought better fighters, maybe a Rakhmonov or a Chimaev or somebody like that on the way up, but they tried to give him Bilal, who was on a very long win streak in that matchup that was ended by no contest. And I think that if that fight would have played out a little bit, we would have learned a lot more.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's going to be an interesting matchup, and we'll finally be able to see who's going to come out on top this Saturday.
Yeah, I'm excited.
We got 2 championship fights. Usually Dana White gets a little greedy on us. He doesn't really like to schedule 2 championship fights, but he spoiled us UFC fans this week. We got Tom Aspinall in a rematch against Curtis Blades for the interim heavyweight championship. Now, Aspinall has pretty much looked flawless in all his fights, but Curtis Blades did get a win over him. Now, a lot of people say it wasn't a 100% official win, saying Tom Aspinall blew out his knee and he wasn't 100%, saying that the win doesn't really count and you could put an asterisk against it. I do think, in my opinion, a win's a win. This fight could definitely go either way. It's definitely going to be interesting. I know Curtis Blades, being from Chicago, he's definitely got to be one of your favorite fighters because he's from your neck of the woods, Brett. So first off, I want to get your opinion on how you think this fight's going to go.
I really like Curtis Blades. I think that he's one of the best, human beings in all of the sport of mixed martial arts. A very kind guy, big heart. You see him on the UFC countdown shows and stuff. He's a very likable human being. But it pains me to say this, but Curtis Blades has always been the bridesmaid and never the bride. He's been in these contests with Derek Lewis in the past, where he's had number 1 contendership. He's been in these contests with Francis Ngannou twice, where number 1 contendership was on the line. And he fell short in all of those matchups. Now against Jailton Almeida, he picked up the biggest win of his career against a guy in Almeida who was really coming on and surging up the division. A lot of people had a lot of high hopes for Almeida. He eventually stuffed the takedown attempts in round 2 and landed big ground and pound against the cage. Curtis Blades does have knockout power in his hands. We saw that against Dawkins when he was able to knock him out with the right hand, and he's been improving on the feet as well. Now, I don't think he's as good as Tom Aspinall. If I have to be honest about the situation, Tom Aspinall to me is the most talented heavyweight that I've seen since Cain Velasquez. His ability to take people to the ground and finish them with either ground and pound or submissions, and then also knock people out on the feet like Sergey Pavlovich, who are one-punch knockout artists themselves. Tom Aspinall can finish fights wherever they take place. And I think that's really a rarity, especially in the heavyweight division. You got to look at guys like Cain Velasquez and Frank Mir. And I think that he's cut from that well-rounded cloth that some of those former champions are as well. And honestly, I think he's the hardest fight in the division for almost anyone, including John Jones. So Curtis Blades this weekend is going to be up against it, especially considering Tom Aspinall blew his ACL out, like you mentioned, in England last year, and he's going to get a chance to get that loss back in emphatic fashion in front of his hometown friends and family. So I've got Tom Aspinall in this one, and I've got him by knockout, and probably in round 2.
Yeah, I like your pick, bro. I guess we're going to agree on this one. I had Tom Aspinall by TKO in round 2 as well. I do think Curtis Blades is tough. And as much as of a fan you may be, or anybody else might be, of Curtis Blades, if you really sit back and look at it, if you're a true fan of MMA, you want Tom Aspinall to go out there and win this fight quick. Because Curtis Blades, if he wins this fight, John Jones is not going to fight Curtis Blades. That's not a high marketable, high selling fight. I think if Curtis Blades wins it, I think that kind of retires John Jones. I think John Jones fights Stipe at the end of the year, and I think he calls it a quits. If Tom Aspinall goes out and gets the quick fight, adds more fuel to the fire of what's already there on the hype between Aspinall, as being the best all-around heavyweight, like you said, between the striking and the grappling, being the toughest matchup for John Jones, I think that would be enough to, entice John Jones to fight him next year in 2025. And, if John Jones wins that, he could go out saying, I beat everybody. And, I beat the top contender. There was no one else to beat. And he pretty much shuts up all the haters on, any GOAT conversations. But if Curtis Blades wins this fight, I don't think that does anything for John Jones' legacy if he beats Curtis Blades. So I do want Tom Aspinall to win it. I do think, it's unfortunate for Curtis Blades. He's paid his dues. He is a great fighter. And I think what makes this fight so enticing is that both guys are all around. I think both guys can strike. Curtis Blades has improved on the striking. And, like you said, he's a great, grappler. Tom Aspinall, great as well. Tom Aspinall is just, I think, way too explosive. And like I said, I think that's going to factor in as well. And I do think he's going to get the TKO win in the second round as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Tom is just a very coordinated and big athlete, very explosive at 6'4", 6'5". He's a real talent, to be honest.
Yeah, 100% agree. We do got some other, enticing matchups. We got King Green, who was formerly Bobby Green, that you guys may recognize him as. Did change his name to King Green, in his late 30s. But he's going up against Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. This is definitely going to be a great matchup. I feel like the UFC's been building this up for a while. Paddy Pimblett's, I think been, beaten in the UFC. He's been a nice win streak, and UFC has taken their time with him. He's been a high marketable guy, a fan favorite, and UFC has taken his time. They didn't rush him in to a high-ranked guy. But after all these years, it's undeniable. After his last win against Tony Ferguson, Paddy Pimblett has positioned himself into a ranked win. This is going to be a great matchup. He's going up against King Green, who's got very, very quick hands, tremendous striker. We've seen what he did to Jim Miller at UFC 300. Really, really pieced him up and really, really damaged him. So I do think, King Green's going to get his strikes in. I do think he's going to hurt Paddy Pimblett. But I think Paddy Pimblett's tough. I think he'll tough it out. I do think he's going to be the better grappler. I think he's going to find a way to get this to the ground. I think he's going to win the fight. It's not going to be exciting, and it's going to be kind of boring, and UFC fans may be upset. But I'm going to go Paddy Pimblett by a boring 29-28, probably split decision. So I got Paddy Pimblett. What do you think, Brett?
Man, I think that the English crowd is really going to have both of these fighters amped up. Bobby Green is someone who thrives on fighting in enemy territory. He's going to want to shut up the 20,000 in the arena that are going to be hyped for Paddy Pimblett and his walkout. Paddy's going to come out there, like he does in all of his fights. Paddy's a very fast starter. We've seen him fade even in the Tony Ferguson fight, but he comes out there trying to finish fights from the opening bell. I think that he tries to get this fight to the ground against Bobby Green. Bobby Green has shown in the past that he can be submitted. He's been submitted twice. He's been knocked out 5 times in his career. He was submitted by Islam Makhachev. Now, I'm not telling you that Paddy Pimblett is the same level of grappler as Islam Makhachev, but there's certainly a path to victory there for Paddy Pimblett. Now, like you're saying, this fight does get ugly and he controls him up against the cage and can find a home for those takedowns. Maybe he can find a submission and get to his back and do like he did against Jordan Levitt and get a rear naked choke. But, I don't see the Paddy Pimblett hype train stopping on this one, to be honest with you. He's a much larger fighter. He's going to come in there probably as physically stronger than Bobby Green. He's younger, 29 to 37. I think that's significant. He's coming into his prime, and this is not a guy who's inexperienced. He's 21-3. This will be his 25th professional fight. So this is not someone who's coming in and has only been under the bright lights 10 or 12 times. He's been there and done that in Cage Warriors in England, and he's going to be fighting in front of his hometown fans, which I think is more than anybody on this card. It's going to affect Paddy Pimblett fighting in front of a crowd like that. So I got Paddy Pimblett with a. Man, it really, I don't know if I'm going to go decision or submission here, but I'll go decision and play it safe.
Yeah, and honestly, Brett, you're talking about the hype train not ending. Yeah, I don't think it ends here, but I do think it ends after this. I do like Paddy Pimblett. I just don't think he's a serious title contender. I do think he's going to be one of those guys that will be a top 15 fighter. And being a top 15 lightweight, is nothing to, sneeze at. I think lightweight, along with bantamweight and maybe middleweight, are the 3 best divisions in the world. I think if you could be ranked in any of those divisions, I think you're a true killer. And I do think Paddy Pimblett is good enough to be a top 15 fighter. I think he'll win this fight, put himself in the top 15. But I think after that, I think once he starts challenging these guys like Money Ngannou and these guys inside the top 10, I do think that's where he's going to start losing. And I think what Paddy Pimblett might turn into is, a really high marketable guy for the UFC that, is inside the top 15, that maybe fights these guys who are just outside the top 15 and, maybe becomes one of these, gatekeepers that we always talk about, because I do think Paddy Pimblett's good enough to be in the top 15, but not good enough to be in the top 10. And I do think he'd be a good test for other guys to see if they're at that level as well. But, I do think this will be the best that it gets. I think he gets this win. I think this will be the best moment for Paddy Pimblett's career. But I do think after this, when he starts challenging the higher guys in the division, I think that's where he starts to lose. But where do you think, Paddy Pimblett's potential in the UFC is, Brett?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. When he steps up after this one, you're talking about guys like Benoit St. Denis. You're talking about guys, like you said, in Renato Moicano, Jalen Turner. I don't think Paddy Pimblett wants any problems with Jalen Turner right now. That would be a bad matchup for him. and a lot of these guys. Benoit Saint Denis as well. Benoit Saint Denis is a European grappling champion. That would kind of nullify the grappling advantage that Paddy has in some of these fights. Now, I actually have a hunch on Paddy Pimblett here, and I'm not trying to, smack talk or shit talk or anything, but, we've seen guys in women in the past that ride this level of stardom that when they lose, it's the final loss. And I'm talking about Ronda Rousey. I'm talking about Gregor Gillespie after that devastating loss to Kevin Lee. If Paddy Pimblett was knocked out in front of his hometown fans viciously by Bobby Green, in the same fashion that Bobby Green knocked out Grant Dawson earlier this year or at the end of last year, I can't remember when that fight was, but if a similar thing happens like that to when Bobby Green knocked out Grant Dawson, I could see Paddy Pimblett hanging it up, man. He is a guy who's rich already. He's stated he does not need the check that comes from the UFC. He actually gets paid more in sponsorships from Barstool Sports than he does, collecting his check with the company. But, I think that he's a guy who, if he was finished viciously, I don't know how many times we'd see him around, considering what he can do outside the cage with, potentially going on YouTube and being a personality there or with Barstool Sports. So, I think that for as long as he stays in it, he's going to stay in it if he keeps winning, but we'll see as he steps up in competition.
Yeah, that's 100% true, Brett. Maybe I do take back what I said about him being a gatekeeper. Maybe, he doesn't need the money. Like you said, he's too popular of a fighter to get like that. And, maybe when the hype train does end, maybe that would be the end to, Paddy Pimblett. But it's going to be interesting to see. I do feel bad because it does seem like, he may not be the most committed guy, when he's not in fighting camp. He does seem to struggle with his weight. And it's going to be interesting to see if he did have one of those bad matchups. Does he put on a bunch of weight and does he lose all his, motivation? Does he stop being the fighter that he used to be? That's going to be interesting.
Look what happened with Darren Till, a similar guy to Pimblett. Darren Till from England got knocked out viciously by Tyron Woodley, got knocked out bad by Jorge Masvidal, and, never really got it back after that. Now, I know Darren Till competed, but I think that's kind of what Paddy Pimblett's trying not to do and trying to avoid a little bit with the matchmaking he's had early in his career. Yeah,
I agree. We got some other great matchups in this card as well. We have a matchup that I thought was going to be on the main card. Originally got moved to the prelims, and now it's looking like it may even be on the early prelims. There's some rumors swirling around about, maybe fighters not making weight, so it's going to be interesting to see. But we got Muhammad Mokaev going up against Manel Kape. I do think this is a potential number one contenders match. I know that there's some rumors out there about Tatsura getting the next title shot against Pantoja. But in my honest opinion, I think this is a number one contenders match. We got striker versus grappler. Mokaev being the great grappler. Manel Kape being the great striker. It's funny, bro, that these two guys are matched up together, and I really hope this fight happens because, when we first started talking about the flyweight division months ago, we were talking about title contenders, and I always mentioned, Muhammad Mokaev. I was always super high on him as the next title contender, and you would always bring up Manel Kape. So it's funny that these two guys finally get to match up against each other, and I guess we finally get to see once and for all who's the true most deserving fighter. I do think Muhammad Mokaev's, grappling will overshadow Kape's striking. I do think this fight may be similar to the fight we saw between Mokaev and, Alex Perez. But I do think Mokaev's going to control this fight on the ground, and I do think he's going to go out there and get the finish because he knows he needs one, and I think he's going to submit Manel Kape in this one. What do you think, Brett? How you see this one going?
Man, this was the hardest one for me to pick on the card because, like you were saying, I'm a huge fan of Manel Kape. I think that if he fights guys like Kai Kara France, or other people that are strikers, I think that he's going to have a lot of success, and he's a guy who can pull off highlight reels and be super entertaining. But when he goes against dominant grapplers, he struggled. And, this matchup really concerns me for Kape, who's entering this one as a plus 130 underdog at ESPN Bet. If you like Muhammad Mokaev, you can get him at minus 155. But when I was looking at this fight and kind of mulling over the statistics, one of them stuck out to me the most, and that was 5.75 takedowns landed per average by Muhammad Mokaev in a fight. That means he's landing more than one takedown attempt per round. That's concerning to me when I look at Manel Kape in this one. So I'm going to take Muhammad Mokaev in the grappling. When we always have these striker versus grappler matchups, I tend to lead or favor the grappler. The one thing that, as I take Makayev, the one thing that I'm wary of is the experience of Cape. Internationally, he was a 2-weight world champion in Ryzen. He's fought the best of the best here, even in the UFC in his short time. I'm picking against him this weekend, but I would not be surprised if he gets the job done. And honestly, if he gets the job done, I think it's by knockout.
And if Mukayev does go out there and when this is his last fight of his contract, he is stating that he does want a title shot. I honestly think he does deserve it, particularly if he does win this fight. Brett, do you think if he goes out there and winning, you think he has to be the next title shot for Pantoja at the end of the year?
Yeah, if this fight goes off, everybody makes weight, and everything goes off as it's supposed to, I think that the winner of this contest has to be the next title contender. Maybe even over Tatsuro Taira. There's a discussion there, and I know Taira is a great Japanese fighter. They haven't had a Japanese champion yet. That'd be a great story. Upwards until 2006, Japan was the epicenter of the MMA world until Pride closed, and nobody's really been able from Japan to get back into the worldwide spotlight in this sport. But at the same time, we're talking about two proven contenders here in Muhammad Makayev and Manel Kape, who have been through the ringer against top-level guys in this division. So, we're talking about ranked fighters. We're talking about guys with massive potential. Muhammad Makayev's undefeated. Manel Kape was a 2-weight world champion elsewhere. I think that the winner of this one has to fight Pantoja. And when you look, Pantoja just faced a guy in Steve Erceg who was ranked 10th in the division. The winner of this contest will be ahead of where Erceg was when he got the title opportunity. So I wouldn't mind seeing the winner of this get the opportunity, especially considering in the past that they dropped all the way down to number 10 to select Steve Erceg.
Now, there's some rumors swirling around about Kate maybe potentially, Manel Kape not being able to make weight. Yeah. Now, if he does not able to go through with this fight, what do you think the UFC should do? Do you think the UFC should cut, Kate, or do you think, Manel Kape should have to, move up to bantamweight?
I know why the hesitancy you can't cut a talent like that. It's hard to cut a talent like that. Because on the open market, they're going to, he's going to go back to Ryzen and they're going to pay him similar to what the UFC does. And maybe if you want that to happen, you let it happen. But, he's a guy who, when they signed him, they thought could be a 2-weight world champion, and I don't think they've given up on that dream yet. I think that this is the last title opportunity and title push that Manel Kape has at 125. And you're right. If he doesn't make weight this weekend, normally a guy who is not as talented as Manel Kape after, the weight troubles he's had in his career would be cut. But, with his talent, with his ability, like I said, if he wins this fight and he goes, who knows, maybe he beats Pantoja, you're talking about a guy who could be a 2-weight world champion. So, Manel Kape, and I'm not saying he'd have the same success at 135 pounds, but he has had the same success at 135 pounds in other organizations. So maybe they make him just move up. If he does miss weight, they say move up to 135. And then go on a win streak, or if you lose in your debut, you're done. But I don't think that they should cut him immediately, especially if he's trying to sacrifice his body to get to 125, knowing that he can compete with some people at 135 too.
Yeah, I love watching him fight. He's definitely one of the most exciting fighters. Even if he was a great fighter, but he wasn't exciting, he was more of a grappler and a boring fighter that just won on points. Maybe the UFC would still consider cutting him. But with him having an exciting fighting style, I think at worst he would just have to be forced to move up to bantamweight, like you said.
Yeah.
We do got another good fight. We have Arnold Allen going up against Gigi Kakazi. This is an exciting matchup of two great strikers. Two guys that could definitely knock you out. I think Arnold Allen, is the younger fighter. I think right now he's better than Gigi Kakazi. I think he's better than Gigi Kakazi ever was, even in his prime. I do think Gigi's just exiting his prime. I don't think he's the best that he was previously. He is kind of older for the division that he fights in. So I do think Allen's going to be able to outbox him. I don't think he's going to get the finish, so I'm going to go Arnold Allen by decision in this one after 3 rounds of being able just to outbox him. How do you see this one going, Brett?
Yeah, I think that the pressure of Allen's going to be a problem in this one. Giga doesn't fight the same off the back foot. We saw that against Calvin Kattar, and Allen only goes forward. So, if you look at Allen's last 2 fights, you'll see 2 losses. But he just lost to undefeated Movsar Evolev, who arguably is the best grappler in this division. And then he lost to Max Holloway, who is maybe the best fighter ever in this division and certainly the best boxer currently in this division. So, those last two losses are to the absolute cream of the crop here at 145 pounds. So to me, Arnold Allen is still an elite prospect. He's still somebody who's going to be in the top 5 for years to come. He's a guy that can headline shows written on fight night cards and, certainly represents the country well, and he'll have him behind him in this one. So I'm going to go with Arnold Allen, just like you, by decision. I think Giga is going to be tough enough to survive for 3 rounds. And if this is fought at range, Giga is one of the best kickboxers in the world. We can't discredit his ability on the feet. He's got that liver kick and those leg kicks and head kicks at distance that can cause problems for just about anybody. But if Allen can get on the inside, if he can use his pressure to make Giga fight with his back off the cage, I think he's going to have a lot of success in this one. And I think he could even find a home for the takedown if he wanted to. I think he's going to be the physically stronger athlete. I'm not saying that Arnold Allen is the greatest grappler in the world, but I think that he is a stronger athlete and can get Giga to the ground as well.
So, I was going to ask you about that, Brett. I mentioned, how this fight would be on the feet. But if this fight did go to the ground, I know, Gigi has improved, with his grappling as time goes on. If you, speak to Beneil Dariush, he says Gigi Kakazi has improved on his grappling tremendously. So if this fight does get to the ground, even if Kakazi's the better fighter, you think Arnold Allen's strength is just too much overwhelming that would overwhelm and, make him the better grappler over Gigi Kakazi?
Yeah, I think that Chikadze would have significant problems if he was put on his back. I don't know if he, and listen, I know he trains with Beneil Dariush, who, Beneil Dariush is great on the ground, but Beneil Dariush isn't the striker Giga is, and Giga's not the jiu-jitsu practitioner that Gilbert is. That's why they train together. That's why they get looks at one another. If Giga gets on the ground against a guy who's physically stronger and he's a kickboxer, and has limited training of getting back up to his feet. Now, he's got an extensive MMA career and has obviously been training, escapes and get-ups his whole career. But I really think that Arnold Allen is deceptively strong. He's somebody who does not give up. He has a tremendous will to win. Even in that Max Holloway fight, he won that 5th round. A lot of people don't remember that. If you go back and watch that fight, all 3 judges had the fight, in that 5th round scored for Arnold Allen. So, and that is something that stuck out to me because Max Holloway is normally a guy who downloads data and pours it on fighters late, but that wasn't the case. Allen was able to actually win a round late on a veteran former champion. So Arnold Allen's impressed me. I'm not deterred by the 2 losses he's had. I think those are 2 of the best fighters that we've seen at 145 pounds. So I've got Arnold Allen in this one. And like to your point, I think that Giga would really struggle on the ground if he was taken there in a bad position.
Yeah, I agree with you, bro. I do think, Arnold Allen is still, like you said, he's lost to really good competition. And I still think he's one of the top guys, in this division. We do got some other great fights, on this card. So we do got some other good thoughts. I'm really, really excited for the other fight card on the main card. We do got Christian Leroy Duncan going up against Gregory Rodriguez, 2 knockout artists, 2 great middleweights, 2 guys who I think are, very, very good just outside the top 15. I do think this fight's going to be exciting, and I think it's probably most likely going to end in a spectacular fashion. What are some other fights and what are some other thoughts you got on this card, Brett?
Yeah, I really like the Christian Leroy Duncan and Gregory Rodriguez. It looks like if there's a problem to the Cape fight with Makayev, that this one will be moved up in that spot. We saw Leroy Duncan against Armen Petrosyan pick up the first loss of his career, but he is a good technical kickboxer. He's got creative and dynamic strikes. We saw him do a bunch of spinning techniques at Petrosyan that probably led to, the loss. But at the same time, against a worse striker, some of those could probably get home. But Gregory Rodriguez is a guy who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion, but likes to stand and trade. It's really kind of weird. He's got this credentialed background on the ground, but, is won 4 of his last 5 fights and has 4 knockouts. So he's really an anomaly. I like Gregory Rodriguez in that one. I think he probably can get the fight to the ground if he needs to. And if he does, he's one of the best in the world there. I'm going to take Rodriguez in that one. But outside of that, there are some other good fights on this card. I think that Mick Parkin and Lucas Bresky at heavyweight may be interesting. Bresky's not a guy who is going to knock your socks off when you look at his resume, but Mick Parkin is still undefeated in the heavyweight division. He's 9-0, so I'll be keeping an eye on Mick Parkin this weekend early as well.
Yeah, I like Mick Parkin's game. I thought, he looked really good against, Usman in his last fight. And like you said, he's undefeated, and I think he'll get the best of him. I think he'll continue that undefeated streak.
Yeah, I think so too. Maybe not the name value on the prelims that we've seen, but it seems like there's a lot of European fighters on there that, honestly, like we've got guys like, Kiefer Crosby and women like Shauna Banyan that I'm really interested to see. I've seen them fight once or twice in their career, but, I like seeing some of those people that we haven't seen very often, especially from Europe.
Yeah, they always joke around about, what's, good for the casuals and what's not. I think the main card's good for the casuals. But I think if you're a really true MMA diehard and UFC diehard, I think you'll find a lot of good gems and a lot of good fights and good fighters on these prelims.
Yeah, I think so too.
We got some other news. Ariel Helwani, is always trying, catch headlines and being, the media, being, the headlines be talked about on ESPN. He gave his predictions and said where the UFC is planning right now and where their heads are at for the next, main events. So right now, Brett, they're saying that, right now UFC 306 at the Sphere is looking like O'Malley versus Merab for the 135 Bantamweight Championship. UFC 307 in Utah is looking like Ilia Topuria against Max Holloway for the 145 Featherweight Championship. That'd be an awesome fight. The Abu Dhabi card, UFC 308 in October, that's supposedly looking to be Islam Makhachev going up against Arman Sarukian for the 155 lightweight championship belt. 309 supposed to be John Jones and Stipe for the heavyweight belt. And then 310, but you can't put any faith in this one. That's supposed to be Conor McGregor and Mike Chandler in that fight. So what are your thoughts on this, Brett? And are you excited for any of these pay-per-views?
Oh, I'm excited for all of them, man. We've got a huge second half of the year if this is true stuff. John Jones, Conor McGregor, that Ilia Topuria and Max fight is one of the most sick fights I've seen, in my 10 years watching the sport. Ilia Topuria to me is one of the most talented fighters I've ever seen. He reminds me a lot of John Jones in the way that he beats guys at their own game. He can go in there against Josh Emmett and get into a 5-round brawl with the brawler. He can go in there against Bryce Mitchell and get a submission against the Eddie Bravo Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He can go in there against Volk, who outstruck Max Holloway on the feet for 3 fights, and knock him out cold. This is a guy who wins fights wherever he wants to. And, at times he's got the confidence and ego to win fights where the other fighters actually have or supposedly are supposed to have advantages. So, Ilia Topuria to me is my favorite fighter right now to currently watch. And him and Max Holloway is a historic matchup. I think that's the one that's really getting slept on. Merab versus Sean O'Malley at the Sphere would certainly be a spectacle. I'm sure they'd have something special for Sean O'Malley's walkout there. But honestly, Anthony, how many years can we say that we've seen Conor McGregor and John Jones fight in the same year recently? And we might see them both fight in the next 6 months.
Yeah, that would be insane. Honestly, if both fights fall through, I think that's the thing that I'd be most surprised about if we do see both John Jones and Conor McGregor. There's always something that's going on with them, whether if it's injury, someone getting arrested, someone tested for steroids. We never know. We still don't know. We got John Jones, still getting in trouble to this day. Conor McGregor, going in and out of fights, missing press conferences. So I think those 2 cards are probably the ones that are up in the air. Those ones are probably on standby. I do think those first 3 are probably almost locks. The O'Malley, versus Merab, that has to happen at the Sphere. O'Malley's been, wanting to fight at the Sphere for a long time. I think he was the first fighter that really, really pushed to be on that card. So I think he deserves it. Like you said, Topuria and Holloway, I think that's the most exciting fight to make right now in the UFC. That would definitely sell out. I think maybe that's why they're not putting it at the Sphere, because I think that could sell out at any card in any venue. Islam Makhachev versus Arman Sarukian, that's the fight to make. I think Sarukian will make that ad so he can be eligible to fight for that card. And I do think that would be, the top fighter for Islam Makhachev. So I'm super, super excited, Brett. And I think all those fights could go either way.
Yeah, I do too, man. I think a lot of those are going to be really even money fights. I don't think there's going to be many big favorites in any of the contests other than Jones over Stipe. I bet that Jones will be a significant betting favorite there. But our producer for this episode and co-host of the MMA Outsiders, Tom Albano, he just told us that Jones and Conor McGregor, if they would fight this year, it'd be the first time that they'd fought in the same calendar year since 2020. So it's coming up on 5 years that we've seen the two biggest names in the sport compete at the same time. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, me too. We got some other rumors swirling around. There's a potential matchup in the featherweight division. We got Aljamain Sterling, arguably one of the greatest bantamweights of all time, who has moved up to featherweight and tried to move his way up in the title contention, going up against Movsar Evolev, who's undefeated and looks like he could be a potential title contender. Now, Dana White may not be the biggest fan of Movsar. He may not be super, super excited, and I think that's going to give him a tough time. I think he's going to have to go the Belal Muhammad Merab route, where he's going to have to win, multiple fights to really be, a title contender. But this is going to be a great matchup, Brett. I think, both these guys are tremendous grapplers. Sterling now at 145 at featherweight is going to be super, super strong. He was already strong for bantamweight, so he's going to be, even stronger at featherweight. What are your thoughts on this fight, Brett?
I like it a lot. But here's the thing to me. I think that this might be the two best grapplers, in this division. And when we see grappler versus grappler matchups, historically these fights take place on the feet. We've seen that in the past with the Colby Covington and Usman fights, amongst others that we've talked about. So when I look at this one, I'm really looking at who's the better striker. And neither of these guys are that great on the feet, if we want to be honest. Aljamain Sterling was chinned by Sean O'Malley. That's the way he lost the title. He's not a guy with knockout power. He was also knocked out, by Marlon Moraes before he captured the title. Movsar Evloev's never lost in his career, but desperately goes after takedowns. We saw him against Diego Lopez honestly kind of get, touched up a little bit on the feet. I know that he won that fight. A lot of it was due to control time. But this one's very interesting to me. I think it's going to tell a lot about these guys striking and where their striking's at. I know they don't have to use it in a lot of the matchups that they've been involved in recently. But I'm very interested to see it. I think it's two dominant and elite grapplers trying to move up the weight class to get opportunity at championship gold.
Now, I know this division, is a tough division to figure out. There's a lot of fights to make. Obviously, we already talked about it earlier in the podcast. You got Ilya against Max for the next title shot. Volk's sitting out there. He'll probably get the next title shot beginning of 2025. But in your opinion, Brett, do you think that this could be a potential number one contenders match, in that the winner of this fight could sit out a year and be fighting for the featherweight belt at the end of 2025 after Holloway gets his shot and after Volk gets his shot at the beginning of 2025?
One of the most frustrating things to me right now, I want to see Josh Emmett back in the mix of things here. Josh Emmett is 39 years old and has not fought since knocking out Bryce Mitchell in what was the knockout of the year last year. I don't understand how you knock a guy out at 38 years old and you wait 9 months to compete again. We're coming up on a calendar year since we've seen Josh Emmett. In his last two fights, he went the distance in a 5-round war against Ilia Topuria when no one's been able to even make it the distance, and then knocked out Bryce Mitchell. He was in literally he looked as good as he's ever looked in his career in his last two fights. I'd like the winner of this fight to take on Josh Emmett. I think that Emmett is someone who's forgotten about in this division. I don't think that either of these guys are necessarily one win away from a title opportunity at this point. So I'd like to see Josh Emmett thrown back into the thick of things. I know he's 39 years old, but you got to get him back into the game before he turns 40. His best days are not quite yet behind him, I do not think, but we haven't seen him in 9 months. So I'd like to see the winner of this fight, Josh Emmett, because I think Emmett would exploit them on the feet. Emmett's a guy who is a collegiate wrestler and is extremely hard to take down. No one's been able really to dominate Josh Emmett on the ground. He's a very stocky athlete and hard to take off his feet. And we know he has one-punch knockout power. He might be the hardest hitting 145er we've ever seen. So I think that he's a matchup nightmare for either of these guys, and they need to face him. If the winner of this matchup should probably face Josh Emmett.
Yeah, bro, I usually don't disagree with you too much, but I absolutely disagree with you with the Josh Emmett pick. Josh Emmett, yeah, he definitely, is the hardest hitting 145er. When he touches you, you absolutely die. You don't move. But I think, he already had his shot when he had that interim shot, title shot against Yair Rodriguez. I think that was his best shot, and I think the loss to Yair Rodriguez really, really hurt himself. Honestly, but if you don't want to give the winner of this fight between Sterling and Movsar the next title shot, and you do got to wait, why not rebook Diego Lopez and Brian Ortega, have the winner of that fight the winner of Sterling and Movsar, and have that be the next title contender. That would give you enough time for the fights to happen. Basically, essentially, this could be like a semifinal fight. The other fight's a semifinal fight. Next thing you know, the winner of this fight is fighting the winner of Diego Lopez and Ortega. And the winner of that would truly, definitely deserve a title shot. And timing-wise, that would be perfect because it would give time for Holloway and give time for Volk to fight. And that title contender would be ready to go by the end of 2025.
Yeah, I liked what you said there. I don't know if Ortega ever makes it back to 145, but even if it's just Diego Lopez, if the winner of this fight fights Diego Lopez, either of those two guys, I just mentioned Josh Emmett because I want to see him get back into the thick of things. After that win over Bryce Mitchell, I feel like he really deserved, something from that, knockout of the year, what he did and how spectacular it was, drop jaws around the world. But yeah, I like what you said with Diego Lopez, and Movsar, Evolev, and Lopez already fought. I think that was a highly controversial fight. That probably needs to be a 5-round main event at a fight night card or something if they do rematch. So I think a lot of people are calling for that rematch between Evolev and Diego Lopez, and I'd certainly like to see Sterling fight him just the same.
Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from, Brett. Who wouldn't want to see Josh Emmett in the fight? He's one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC for a reason. Honestly, if I had to come up with a fight for him, why not rematch him against Yair Rodriguez? Yair Rodriguez is in a tough position right now in UFC. I really don't have a matchup for him. He already got the title shot against Volk and didn't look too good, and then didn't look too good against Brian Ortega. So he definitely doesn't deserve a fight against any of these top guys that we explained, like a Diego Lopez, Sterling, or Movsar. So why not rematch Josh Emmett against Yair Rodriguez? Both of them need an opponent, and I wouldn't mind seeing that title or seeing that matchup again.
No, I wouldn't either, especially after how Rodriguez has looked recently.
Yeah. We definitely got to recap, what happened in UFC Fight Night last weekend. We definitely had the Jake Paul fight where everybody was watching, but we had UFC Fight Night as well. So we got to give our reactions to UFC Fight Night. We have a new top 15 flyweight in Bruno Silva, KO and Cody Durden after losing the fight. He was losing the first 2 rounds. But then landed a vicious strike that split up Durden, and that pretty much sealed the deal. Bruno Silva, proved it only takes 1 second to change a fight. He's on a 4-fight win streak by finish, 4 straight wins by finish. Now with him, getting this fight, he's definitely going to be in the top 15. It's going to be interesting to see where he goes. I was also really impressed by Haider Amil. His fight with Lee was super, super exciting. Both guys just stood right there in the middle of the ring. And, and just duked it out and went strike for strike. Haider Amil getting the best of him, winning the fight. He's a tremendous guy, and he's on a tremendous trajectory. I think right now after that, performance, I think he deserves a top 15 guy. But what were your overall thoughts on this fight card, Brett?
Yeah, I think Haider Amil is a new contender, a name to look out for. He impressed me tremendously. Lee didn't really impress me at all in that matchup. I got to be quite honest with you. I thought that he should have gone for a takedown once Amil started, obviously having success on the feet. But Haider looked fantastic, man, and he's going to be someone to keep an eye out for. Cashed as an underdog, was actually an undefeated underdog going into that matchup. So that was very interesting. In the main event, we had Verna Jandiroba get a submission win over Amanda Lemos, an arm bar there. I thought that was really technical. She's getting her 14th submission victory, that was. She's one of the best grapplers in all of women's MMA. She's not a household name, but if she continues to submit these top-level fighters, maybe she'll earn herself a title opportunity in the future. So I thought there were some gems on this card. I thought it was a good card, one of the fight night cards that is kind of put together, and, there's not really a lot of name value, but there were some good moments.
Yeah, he definitely was one of the weaker ones. Like you said, it wasn't one that a lot of people were going to be putting their eyes on. I think that's why we have such a good UFC 304. One last fight I want to shout out was Do-Ho Chai. In just his second fight in 5 years, after having a draw against a really good fighter in Kyle Nelson, he came back in the second round and really, really hurt Bill Agoyle with a strike. Got him a really, really good strike right to the head, which led to a TKO win against a really, really solid fighter. So I was really, really impressed by his comeback.
Yeah, I was too, man. I remember watching his fight with Cub Swanson that got into the UFC Hall of Fame when I was still in high school. I think that was in 2016. That was one of the most all-action fights I've ever seen. And earned Do-Ho Choi a Hall of Fame spot there. So, I was really happy to see him come back and get a win. And after taking 5 years off, Anthony, I was surprised to see that he's only 33 years old still. So he's still got some mileage left on the clock. And I think that he might have another run in him.
Yeah, 100%. And this definitely, puts him right back on a good path.
Yeah.
We got one more thing to break down the UFC fight fans. Something that we just saw, earlier today. Francis Ngannou was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he told Joe Rogan that, he will, be fighting, Renan Ferreira, and it's in the works for October 19th in Saudi Arabia. It's not official, but it is in the works. There's some rumors that, that's why there was some scheduling changes with the Bellator and the PFL. Honestly, Brett, this is the fight to make. We knew this was going to happen. We knew Francis Ngannou, once he was going to leave boxing and go back to the MMA realm, that he was going to have to fight Ferreira. Honestly, Brett, I think this is the most exciting and the best fight to make outside the UFC. I'm super, super excited for it. I think it could go either way. What are your thoughts on this fight, Brett?
Well, if Francis Ngannou thinks he's getting back into mixed martial arts with some type of cupcake win or some easy fight, he certainly isn't. He goes from getting knocked out by Anthony Joshua pretty devastatingly to having his first fight back against a very athletic 6'8" Brazilian knockout artist in Renan Ferreira, who just knocked out Ryan Bader in under 20 seconds with really kind of just one punch and then ground and pound. Renan Ferreira is an absolute freak athlete. He's somebody who can do backflips standing. If he grew up in America, he'd be a tight end or a power forward in the NBA or the NFL. I mean, he's that level of athlete. He's got tremendous power on the feet. Neither of these guys are going to go for takedowns. This is going to be an all-out war for as long as it lasts, but it might not last very long. Francis might go at him like he did with Jairzinho Rosenstrike and, try and get it done early, knowing that he's a kickboxer, and try and use his aggressiveness against him. So these are two big, very athletic and powerful guys. I don't see this fight ending any way other than knockout and probably in the first round. So these guys have something to settle, and the PFL heavyweight championship is going to be on the line.
Yeah, Brett, and I know Francis Ngannou, fought in UFC for a while. We never got the John Jones fight, but Francis Ngannou has fought a lot of great fighters, in the UFC. But would you say Ferreira may be the toughest matchup so far for Francis Ngannou in his mixed martial arts career?
Wow. I think that Ciryl Gane is a very, very interesting stylistic matchup for a lot of people. And I'm not going to sit up here and say that Renan Ferreira is the technical kickboxer that Ciryl Gane is, or that he has as many tools in the tool shed, standing and striking as Ciryl Gane. But when you talk about knockout power, there's only been one other fighter that Francis Ngannou's competed against that has a similar or greater knockout punch to him, and that's Derek Lewis. And in that matchup, it was a very, tactical, not what we thought we were going to get matchup, and is widely regarded as one of the worst fights in UFC history. So I don't think that's necessarily what we'll get. But Francis did look tentative in the past against a puncher in Derek Lewis, and he looked tentative in his last fight against Anthony Joshua. I'm interested to see how he comes back after getting brutally knocked out, and if he'll have the same, if he'll be able to pull the trigger the same, with the same assertiveness and aggressiveness and confidence that he did in the past, or whether that tentativeness will creep back in and really be exploited by Renan Ferreira. It's a big question to me in this one.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brett. That's definitely going to be, a telltale sign to this outcome. Are we going to get the old Francis Ngannou? Is there going to be any slippage, any confidence loss? Because I think it's going to take, everything Francis Ngannou has. I think it's going to take his best, and I think it's going to take the old Francis Ngannou to get a win against Ferreira. I think anything short of that will be a loss. And what a disappointment that would be if Francis Ngannou was supposed to be, the king of the PFL. He's supposed to be the top, guy outside the UFC. If he goes out there and loses his first, MMA match after leaving the UFC, and Ferreira becomes the top, heavyweight outside the UFC, man, that's going to be a very, very tough loss mentally for Francis Ngannou.
Yeah. But honestly, if you're the PFL, I know that you spent a lot of money on Francis Ngannou, but you got to look at this similarly to how the UFC looked at Ben Askren. When they brought in Ben Askren, they probably knew that, they were going to get a couple fights out of Ben, but what they were going to do is build stars off of him. And what they got is a huge star in Jorge Masvidal after that fight. If Renan Ferreira can beat Francis Ngannou, you might not get Francis Ngannou for 4, 5, 6 fights, but what you'll get is a huge star in Renan Ferreira that you can market as a PFL homegrown heavyweight champion, and someone, once John Jones retires, whether it's true or not, you can call the best heavyweight in the world.
Now, if Ferreira does go out there and win that, I'm not sure how many, fights he has left on his contract, but, would he decide to go to the UFC if he does become this big marketable guy? And could the PFL end up losing Ferreira in a couple years if he does become this ultimate dominant guy that we have to see fight at Aspinall or someone like that in the UFC heavyweight division?
I honestly think that this is the best situation that the PFL have had surrounding a superstar since Don Davis and the new brass of the company have been there. One, when they had Kayla Harrison, they always knew she was going to leave. She always wanted to go do bigger and better things and had to prove herself elsewhere. She was also involved in tournaments that made her a lot of money, which really capped the value of what she could have gotten as a free agent with the PFL, because a lot of that money came from her tournament success. So you've got a guy in Renan Ferreira who is not wealthy, has not won an excess of 2 or 3 tournaments like Kayla Harrison, and you can throw a brickload or a truckload of money at if he beats Francis Ngannou. I think that the PFL would lock up Renan Ferreira and give him money that he could not refuse if he beat Francis Ngannou.
So if you, honestly, in your opinion, Brett, if he beats Francis Ngannou, you think that they would throw him so much money, and since he hasn't been paid yet, you don't think that we would ever see Ferreira in the UFC?
No, I think they would try and make him the face of their company. And outside the UFC, think about it. If he goes out there, there's only one way, in my opinion, that either one of these guys wins this fight, and it's by devastating knockout. So if he goes in there and flatlines Francis Ngannou in mixed martial arts, the first man to do it in mixed martial arts, he's one of the biggest heavyweight names regardless of promotion. He's a guy that is going to be a household name. This is a fight that might even end up on pay-per-view. We haven't been told that yet, but I'm assuming that's the plan for Francis Ngannou. So I really think if Renan Ferreira wins this fight, he just catapults into a new stratosphere of stardom.
And that would be great for the PFL, Brett, because now that you make that point, think about it. The Bellators had a lot of guys, who never went to the UFC to be face of the company. We've seen Patricia Ferreira do it for a long time. Yep. And he always was a committed company guy, face of the company. PFL hasn't gotten that guy yet. And, if Ferreira goes out there and beats Ngannou, maybe he does become their version of that. And he's just their very, very high legendary guy that, was one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. Like you said, that was homegrown and spent, his whole entire prime in the PFL.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for the PFL. And I honestly think it's a win-win situation. A lot of people are going to come and say that it's a catastrophic event if Francis loses. But I honestly don't think that it will be as bad as some other people are saying.
Yeah, that's a good point, bro. I never thought about that way. Now that you mentioned it, I kind of agree with that now that you made that statement.
Yeah, I think that it's a really big fight, though. If Francis Ngannou does win, then they've got their superstars still the same. So I think it's really a win-win situation for the PFL in this one.
Yeah, the PFL can't lose, and this is going to sell out. This may beat what the UFC does that weekend. This is really going to put the PFL on the map.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. I think it's the biggest event that the PFL's had in probably ever.
Okay, fight fans, that's everything that we have this week. We're going to have a lot to break down next week as well. We're going to have to react to everything that happens at UFC 304. There's obviously going to be a lot of fights and a lot of fighters that we didn't bring up that are definitely going to stand out and we're definitely going to have to bring up next week. So definitely stay tuned for this weekend. Also, make sure to follow the Puncher's Chance podcast on all social medias on Punch ETB. Make sure to follow the Empty the Bench podcast network on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. Make sure to also to follow our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ETB Network for our shows and all of our other ETB Network sports shows. If you can't watch Puncher's Chance, then take us on the road and listen to us wherever you can go.
Thanks for joining us, fight fans. We'll be in here next Wednesday coming at you same time, and we'll be breaking down the UFC 304 and reviewing it and all the fighters in the breaking news that comes in the coming week. Thanks for joining us.
See ya.
See ya.